Alright, hello everyone. Something a bit different. Today I've actually read some fiction, which I realise I hardly ever read, because I went into a different bookstore, and unlike all the usual bookstores I go into, there wasn't 4 stories of books to choose from. There was a set of shelves about 10 feet long and 4 shelves high, and so I got some George Orwell. Now, whenever people think of George Orwell, they probably think of 1984, which I read in school and remember hardly anything of. And probably what I do remember has been more shaped by cultural discourse on Big Brother and everything else, or Animal Farm. And that's one of the things about George Orwell, is what he wrote about 80 years ago is still topical, is still relevant today. So I picked up a couple of books while I was there, because HMV has a really good deal on buying 2 books. I thought I have to buy at least 2, right? Can't just buy one. Let me just sort these books out because it's going to fly everywhere. And I picked up this one, which I hadn't heard of, which is Coming Up for Air. And I read the back of it and I thought, oh my god, that's me. So 80 years ago he writes this, and today people are still picking it up and are absolutely able to relate to the characters. Let me read you the back. George Bowling, 45, mortgaged, married with children, is an insurance salesman with an expanding waistline, a new set of false teeth, and a desperate desire to escape his dreary life. How many people are going to read that and think, oh my god, that's me? Okay, I'm 46, I've got 2 children, I'm mortgaged. My waistline hasn't expanded too much, thank god, and I've got all my own teeth, right? So that's what made me read it. I wasn't really sure what to expect, because I've so rarely read fiction, like I said, and it seems there are 2 types of books. You get the book where the opening sentence just grabs you, it's got to grab you, but then it's really hard for the writer to keep up that, that kind of pace, and after about 5 or 6 chapters, you think, god, where is this going? This is so right? And then you have the other ones which don't grab you immediately, and you've got to give it maybe, once again, 5 or 6 chapters for it to actually pick up, and you think, well, now something's happening. This book didn't really fall into either of those categories, because the blurb on the back grabbed me so much I was willing to give it 5 or 6 chapters without thinking, when's it going to grab me? And it grabbed you pretty quick, because it is funny. He's got this humour which is a bit, obviously the humour that was written in the 1940s isn't going to land exactly the same as it does now, but most of it is timeless. And you follow this guy, who, it starts off, the first sentence was pretty good. He said, I think I got the idea when I got my set of false teeth. And you think, what? It just makes sense when you read it. The way he describes the characters, you can just imagine all those characters actually existing. There's nothing too outlandish, but I think that's part of what a good writer does. I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it. The way it ends, it's not Hollywood. There aren't explosions and time travel and really scantily dressed young women, and it's just everyday life, but made really interesting and actually really quite moving in some parts. One of the things that happens is the town he grew up in changes a great deal, and when he goes back to it, he realizes that town doesn't really exist anymore. So the history he imagined, it is just history, it's not there anymore. And he describes it beautifully, riding through the town, and it's as if he was seeing a ghost town, which is a bubble around what you can actually see, which is his memories, and the actual town. And then it raises the theme of a person's identity being their location, because there's a sentence in there, it's something like, he realized, I was the ghost, because his old town doesn't exist anymore. And then there's the slow successive punches of realizing that even though his family was such an establishment in the town, in the new town, nobody knows the name, nobody knows who they were, nobody knows anything about them, and he's just a nobody. And it goes back to those memories and the whimsical things that we all really like. So for him, it's fishing. But in his life, with the mortgage and the children, he never gets a chance to do it. If he brings it up, his wife will say things like, what a child, what kind of a man wants to fish? And we've all seen this happening to other people. We've all had, a taste of it ourselves. And because of that, I think it's a really good book. And this is probably one of my shortest reviews because that's about all I can think to say of it. You know, when I read a non-fiction book, there's all these ideas and all these explanations and all these concepts. With this, it's just a story, and that's the guy. That's, you know, well, George Bowling, the fictional character. There's definitely an element of autobiography to most of his writing, most of Orwell's writing, fictional writing that is. He did some non-fiction as well. I guess that's the case with most writers. They will see things through their own lens, and their own lens is the one they wear themselves. So it's got to have an autobiographical element. I'm sure you can get writers who are so imaginary they can just make up the craziest thing ever, and it's never happened to them, unless it was on some drug-induced trip, like Philip K. Dick, who was on a lot of drugs, and probably hallucinated and attempted suicide a few times. So sometimes it just occurred to me, knowing about the author makes reading their stories more interesting, because just there I think to myself, my God, what kind of trip was Philip K. Dick on when he wrote this or that or this or that? But Orwell, yeah, I'll probably read more of his stuff now. I'll go back and I'll read 1984, so that when it comes up in conversation, I'm actually imagining based on the text rather than just, you know, the cultural icon that it's become. But I'd give this book, I was going to say 7 out of 10 because I prefer non-fiction, but from a fiction perspective, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. And I may adjust that later on in life as I start reading more and more fiction, because I won't be shooting in the dark. But anyway, that's George Orwell. I'll read you the rest of the blurb now, coming up for air, because the blurb got me, so I'll read you the rest of it. George Bowling, 45, mortgaged, married with children, is an insurance salesman with an expanding waistline and a new set of teeth, and a desperate desire to escape his dreary life. He fears modern times, since in 1939 war is imminent. There's some brilliant war passages in here, foreseeing food queues, soldiers, secret police and tyranny. So he decides to escape to the world of his childhood, to the village he remembers as a rural haven of peace and tranquility. But what will he find when he gets there? That's good. And his humour is funny as well. There's a scene where he's describing when he goes back to his old town. There was a woman he was with before he got called up for war, and then after the war they never met again. So in one sense of speaking, he abandoned her. But when he goes back, he sees this woman from behind, and he's describing this woman as just terribly misshapen by age, and where there should have been hips, there was just a huge mound of flesh, and then he realizes it's the woman he used to be with. And she's a shopkeeper, so he goes into the shop, and even their hands touch, and he's looking at her face, and oh my God, what happened? Which is, it sounds cruel, but humour often is a little bit cruel. And I'm sure you do it sometimes. Well, you look in the mirror at yourself and you go, oh my God, what happened to me? but it's quite entertaining. It's a good read. I'll give it 8 out of 10. That's coming up for air by George Orwell.